Live from the Trustmark Studios, the economic outlook for 2020 looking good. Make sure your business takes full advantage by putting the Trustmark small business team to work for you. We made an executive decision and moved Angela Cockerham up, Representative Angela Cockerham, who is chairperson, Cockerham, of Judd B in the House. Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's Judd A.
Oh, it's Judd A. So, does that really matter, or is Judd A better than Judd B?
Well,
I got Judd A here. I'm sorry, I just said Judd B.
That's a really good question because, I was previous chair of Judd B last year, so that's probably why you said it. They're both good chairmanships. Yeah. However, I would say, Paul, I'm very grateful to be chair of Judd A. So.
All right, but here's a learning situation. We talk about learning things on this program. Tell me the differences between those.
So Judd B primarily deals with a lot of criminal laws, criminal legislation that's introduced by colleagues in the House and the Senate, for the House, I should say. Mm-hmm. And Judd A deals mostly with civil. It does a little bit of criminal, not that much typically, but mostly civil.
So they do both have their distinctive jobs.
They do, exactly. And, both committees are quite popular, Judd A especially, and so very grateful to have the opportunity to serve as chairman.
Judd A probably has more bills that actually make it into law than B, or is that it's about even?
It actually depends on the year and what actually needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And so I think in looking back, I had the opportunity to do a judicial conference last year on the coast for Judd B and got a chance to examine both laws that have passed for A and B. And so the numbers are typically running about the same.
Now, I know you got meetings this morning that start rather early, so I was going to get you in, get you out, but I want to make sure we use this visit as much as we possibly can. Tell me what you're working on.
So for Judd A, I'm working on the GAP Act. As you know, that act is guarding and protecting against vulnerable adults and children, making sure they're protected. So that bill passed last year out of Judd A, and we're going to go in and make a few modifications to that particular bill. As you know, we do have to make sure that our children and our vulnerable adults are protected. Yep. So I'm going to introduce an amendment to that particular bill. And I've been looking over the roster, the list that we have gotten for introductions for Judiciary A, and the colleagues have put in a lot of work. You see bills that have an interest maybe to a particular district, for instance. Maybe you want to add another chancellor because, Judiciary A also does judicial redistricting and the placement of judges. And so I've seen several bills to come in for that. We want to make sure that our residents here in Mississippi have equal access to the court system. Then I've also seen bills that deal with how we are going to address maybe abuse. There are a lot of abuse statutes that are looking to be amended. There have been bills. One that I saw particular and took notice to yesterday as I was looking and preparing for the show was the Uniform Airship Partition Act, which I think may be interesting. So there's a broad...
What is that? The Airship Act?
No, Airship Partition.
Okay.
When you're partitioning property. So not to get down in the weeds with particular bills, I would just like to say that there's a broad swath that has been introduced. And so I want to make sure as we move forward over this year and the next 3 years, my prime goal has been making sure that we introduce bills or pass bills that are going to be good for the entire state.
I think it's been one of the things that the Speaker wanted to do this year, and I would imagine also the Lieutenant Governor is to say, let's don't put a lot of superfluous stuff there. We got 4 months, but we want to cut it short as we can, and we want to make sure we deal with the bills that need to be dealt with.
The bills that need to be dealt with, and then you also have 4 years.
4 months.
No, I mean in a term.
4 years. That's true.
Yes, exactly. 4 years in a term. So
that's true.
You don't have to do it all in 1 year. That's always been my philosophy.
Sure. Committee involved in this. We had the Supreme Court Justice on the other day, Justice Randolph, as far as the courts are concerned and the expansion thereof. Is Judd A involved in that?
Yes, I actually had Chief Judge Randolph at our committee last Tuesday. We actually had a presentation by the Supreme Court.
Your thoughts?
My thoughts is that the Chief Justice is absolutely correct. introduced and passed legislation last year for courts of intervention. And so I think that these courts will help, especially with our correction issue that we have. And that was one of the main points that the Chief Justice drove home last week.
If you look at those numbers, and those numbers were pretty substantive, and he had them backed up, the return on dollars are just it's not arguable. I mean, it's very good value if we do this.
It's a very good value if we do it, and I hope. And I think, too, that it will help break this recurring cycle that we have. And that's one of the main issues that I think out of what has happened in December and January up at Partition. We're looking at some corrections reform. As you know, in Judiciary B, when I chaired it last year, we actually started. I think our new chairman of Judiciary B, Nick Bain, is going to be looking at some correction reform also. And then you know that we have our corrections chairman, Kevin Horan, also. Yeah. I mean, we have a hearing later today on it. But Chief Justice is absolutely correct when you look at the drug courts. And I'm pretty sure, Paul, that you've been to a drug court graduation.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Okay. Well, I've had the opportunity to attend a drug court graduation, had the opportunity to speak at one, and to see how drug courts affect the lives of others. And now that we're adding these other courts of intervention, I think that it's only going to help enhance the quality of life in the state of Mississippi. And that's all what we're actually trying to do.
Well, he let the audience know things that we had no idea about. The Veterans Court, too, because we didn't know that as far as general
Veterans
public's
Court,
concerned.
you've got the mental health courts. Yeah. And so our veterans, and you know this just as well as I, Paul, that we have to make sure that our veterans
Absolutely.
are protected.
Yesterday passed the Walnut Grove funding, or at least the bill that would generate that?
That would look at what it would take to go in, and if
we don't know how much it's going to cost yet.
Exactly. I had the chance to tour Walnut Grove with the speaker back in 2018, right before the session started. It was the speaker and some other colleagues in the House.
2018?
2018.
Okay.
Yes, it was during the fall.
When you looked at it, how many individual cells? Do you remember some of the numbers there? How many people could it house?
I don't remember any of the individual numbers in terms of how many cells, et cetera, but I do know that the facility is, at that particular time, it was a facility that was in good condition. It was in good shape.
A lot better than 29.
Exactly.
Plus the fact, and I've heard 300, well, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I also heard the number, it costs about $1 million to fix up. Have you heard any number at all?
I've heard some numbers, but I'm actually waiting. It would be good to get some actual numbers from DFA as to what the actual cost would be.
Angela Cockerham is my guest, chairman of Judd A. Are you on the prison task force?
No, I'm not on the prison task force. I'm not. I do, though, for the past maybe 7 or 8 years, I have been subcommittee chair for the corrections budget. And this year, I've had the first opportunity since I've served in the House for the past 16 years to serve on the corrections committee.
We were talking about yesterday when Juan Barnett was in with me, and we had a good conversation, and God bless him, because it was the first time in. He was a little nervous, but he did a great job. But when we were talking about it, we talked about on the air and off the air, maybe a curriculum as we do workforce in development, a curriculum for high school graduates or those in community college in the correctional field.
No.
To a point where they got some type of certification. They're trained in that level of law enforcement. And when they go into that system, whether it's in the Mississippi Delta at Partition or Walnut Grove, they go in with the necessity to pay them more.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. As you know, too, the speaker had a symposium on workforce development. This would have been last year. And so workforce development is going to be one of those issues that's big. But in the correction system, I think that's a great idea. We have to make sure that when individuals are released, they have some kind of tool or trade to help them. One
more segment. I want to get you out of here at 7:30. I'll make sure we'll do that.
We need to do 3 probably, because I feel like we have so much to catch up with.
Well, I'm here as long as you want to. She is Angela Cockerham at Walnut Grove, so it's a pretty big facility.
It is a big facility.
Yeah. But if you're moving some of those, Angela Cockerham is my guest. She's chairperson of Judd A in the House. If you're moving those, and I would guess that's some of the worst of the worst at Partition.
So I would say based on maybe the action or the crime that has been committed, I do think that you can't lock up an individual forever and throw away the key. There has to be, whether it's drug and alcohol treatment or just like you just talked about a few minutes ago, some kind of vocational training, then we have to implement that so that when individuals are released, like I said, they're just not thrown away and say, we're just going to shutter you up. But we do have to make sure that we provide some kind of services while they're incarcerated.
You have one bill, the Sexual Assault Response for College Students Act, and that's HB 158. That's your bill?
It is. I've introduced that bill, Paul, probably for the last 5 years. This year it's a little bit different, and so I've tweaked it just a little bit over the summer and fall. I worked with Sandy Middleton. She has the bridge out in Rankin County. I worked with her and some of her staff at the bridge, and we looked at how we can tweak the campus sexual assault bill just a little bit this particular year. As you know, it's passed the House for the last 4 years. Typically, it's gone over to the other chamber, and we've not seen any movement or action with it. But I'm hoping this year we can move the bill forward and put something in place for the students that are on our campuses throughout the state.
When you look at deadlines here, because we had one, was it Monday of this week? There was a deadline, and as far as the legislature is concerned, because we're bumping into some of the deadlines now.
So actually, we just had one yesterday.
Yesterday was Wednesday.
Yesterday was Wednesday, and that was the deadline to request legislation, and then we have another deadline that's going to come up on Monday. That would be our introduction deadline.
For both houses?
For both houses. Yes, they're compatible for both. And then the next deadline, which is going to be the deadline that everybody probably needs to circle with a red Sharpie on their calendar, is March the 3rd, and that's when both chambers have to report legislation out of their committees, out of their own respective House committees or Senate committees. So that's the next major deadline. Yeah. So all the legislation you and I have been talking about, if I'm going to do something with it in Judd A, we've got to pass it out.
And then appropriations are a little bit different.
Appropriations are a little bit different, yes.
If money bills from that. So there are a lot of other things going on, as we were talking about off the air, the Mississippi Department of Human Services and that investigation that goes on. Nothing about Judd A that's involved in that. So
far, not to my knowledge. You never know what may come up between now and the end of session. I do definitely think we have Auditor White who's involved in it. We also have our U.S. Attorney Michael Hurst, who's also involved in it, and other law enforcement officials. So we'll just let them do their respective jobs with respect to this investigation and see what comes forth.
In this whole prison reform thing, talking about the prison situation plus the prison reform that we've done, and we talked yesterday with Juan Barnett about the parole system, the whole thing, parole officers, all of this. Is there anything in Judd 8 about that's going to be revisited, or a bill that deals with that?
Not perhaps directly right now, maybe indirectly with Judiciary B. I do know in talking with the parole board and also just with families directly, I think that's a whole nother aspect of this that we have to remember and include as legislators are the families. And in talking to some families, one of the concerns that has been expressed to me is, Angela, that I do have a family member, they're up for parole, but maybe they don't have a residence or some of the other requirements that need to be in place in order for them to be released. So that's another aspect of the criminal justice reform that
we were talking about a halfway house or something like that.
Exactly, that we need to look at.
Is that happen a lot?
It does, unfortunately, happen quite often.
They have no family to go to, and
Well, maybe perhaps it's not necessarily family, but you have to have an actual physical residence. And you can go and stay with family, so maybe sometimes they don't have a family member that they can go and stay with. One of the aspects that I've enjoyed, unfortunately, throughout this prison issue that we've had at Partition is, like I said, talking to family members. I've gotten the opportunity to do it throughout the tenure as being a state rep, but really talking and meeting with the families to say, listen, this is a big issue. And if you would, while you're looking at particular statutes, consider this, because the family is going to be the direct link to the individual who's incarcerated.
Got to be part of it.
It got to be a part of it. And they are, and they're speaking up on their behalf.
Just as a voice of the people out there behind the microphone and not in state government. And I related this yesterday with Juan Barnett. I've been doing this for a long time. We've been talking about these same things over and over and over, and we meet this prison crisis almost like it's just happened. Recidivism, the training them when we can train them, having programs. How many times did we talk about this with Christopher Epps? All the times that he was on, about what programs are going on within the prison, all these things that are happening, and we never get them done. It's almost like 5 years from now, we'll be talking about the same things like it's a novelty.
Well,
somewhere down the line, we got to get it done.
Well, here's the thing, Paul. I would agree in some aspects with that, but then I also say this. I think as the times change, the issues change. And so maybe what was implemented by the legislature in some aspects did work at that particular time. However, as you move forward, like I said, the issues change, and you can't remain stagnant, and you have to constantly have your finger on the pulse of the issue.
I understand there, and one thing that has changed over the last 10 or 15 years is we have a situation where people don't want to say this, well, even though we have had people say it. The gangs are running the prisons now.
So you do have an issue with maybe some gangs. Again, what has worked perhaps in the past, and this doesn't just apply with corrections, Paul. This applies across all aspects of any particular committee that we have, any particular issue in the legislature. As you see new issues develop, and maybe what we introduced to address a particular issue, maybe in 2015, it has to be amended. I will say this. I don't think that the legislature, with respect, whether it's to corrections or any other issue, we do have an issue with corrections. There has been some attempts made to address whether it's staffing, salaries, etc. We just need to move forward and trying to figure out how we're going to address it.
You're going to have to do that at Walnut Grove. You spend money, you put it in there, and you got a situation there also with you got to staff it.
Well, you've got staffing, and then you also have salary alignments. That's another issue that has been addressed. So we're working on it.
That's a tough situation. No, you take any other agencies, there are tough questions and maybe some easier questions. In corrections, they're all tough questions.
Corrections is all tough questions. Medicaid, those are all tough questions. Education, they're all tough questions. But when you have tough questions, you don't run away from them, Paul. And I'd say this, I don't think any member of the legislature, whether the House or Senate, is running away from these particular issues.
How is this term a little bit different than last with all the new leadership and new members of the Senate and the House?
Well, I think the session is going very well from my perspective. We do have a lot of new members in the House, and we have new members in the Senate. I think it's always good when you have new members that are coming with new ideas. You also have younger members, too. And so with that younger member that's elected, you're hoping that they stay there for a little bit of time because, as you know, last term we did have a great number of members in the House to retire. I think the Speaker, as always, is doing a fantastic job. This isn't his first time at the rodeo. Yep. And then with all three, the Governor Reeves, he's been our state treasurer. He served as lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor was also our Secretary of State. So they're all doing very well.
This 4-year term will be dealing with redistricting, so it's going to be interesting.
It will be interesting. There are so many issues and hot topics that are going to be in the legislature this year, so everybody needs to stay tuned.
Do not be a stranger.
I will not.
Angela number 1 is done. We'll let her go handle more important business. Angela number 2, Angela Hill, will be in a little bit later on. Always good seeing you.
Always good.